Hello YouTube, Bane666 here. So let's continue with the Rationalwiki's look at the men's rights movement's main talking points as they see them. And we're going to be looking at education and sports. Now before we look at their claim of what our claims are, which is really nothing but a straw man, let's have a look at a couple of clips from the father of the modern-day men's rights movement, Warren Farrell, who is talking about this actual subject. I think it would be interesting to contrast what we actually say as opposed to what Rationalwiki thinks we're saying.
That for the first time in U.S. history, our sons will have less education than their dads. If we take this worldwide, the UN found this year that boys have fallen behind girls in every single one of the 70 developed nations. So what do developed nations have in common? They have in common a much greater propensity for divorce, leaving boys oftentimes without their dads. So dad-deprived boys becomes the #1 cause of the boy crisis. So for example, before age 9, girls and boys committed suicide equally. Age 10 to 14, twice the amount for boys. 15 to 19, 4 times the amount. Age 20 to 24, 6 times the amount for boys. So if dad-deprived boys is the #1 cause of the boy crisis, the #2 cause is very much related. Boys go from the dad deprivation in home to a male teacher deprivation in school. We didn't used to know the importance of that. We now know that boys do better with male teachers on average. But we also have discovered this year, as a result of the UN doing a study worldwide, that the feminization of education is a contributing factor to boys' problems. When the United Nations did a study worldwide, they found that boys all over the world are 1/3 more likely to be graded higher on a reading test when the teacher does not know that the person who took the test is a boy. This leads to cause 3, lack of purpose. When I was a boy, we basically had 2 senses of purpose. You were either a warrior or you were a sole breadwinner. But as divorces occurred, male-female relationships got shook up, and boys and the feminist movement came in, and they did a wonderful thing, which was they expanded girls' sense of purpose from the old raise children only to being able to raise children, raise money, or do some combination of both. But no one stepped in and helped expand boys' sense of purpose in an equivalent way. Instead, boys were told, earn money, earn money, earn money, or alternatively, be a loser. The women's movement and the society helped create affirmative action to introduce women to professions they hadn't been comfortable with, such as the STEM professions, so science, technology, engineering, and math. But no one introduced boys to the caring professions. So one possible solution to the purpose void is to expand boys' sense of purpose, to consider the option of being a full-time dad, an elementary school teacher, a social worker, a nurse. We even have to say words like male nurse. Or we can look at, more broadly, the creation of a larger White House Council on Boys and Men in the way that we already have a White House Council on Women and Girls to address the 10+ causes of the boy crisis. A question that somebody once asked me was, well, will boys not consider themselves losers when they become full-time involved in the caring professions? And there is pressure in that. But I saw back as early as 1976 a clear example of why boys will not consider themselves losers when they get more involved with their sons.
Okay, so let's have a look at what they claim that our claims are. Now, remember, Rationalwiki says all these arguments included here are taken directly from men's rights groups, which I've pointed out in an earlier episode is not exactly true. And the first thing to note about this straw man that they're constructing is that they have 0 citations for these claims, which supposedly come from actual MRA sites. Interesting that. Not a single citation to back up any of these claims about us. And as we read through this, you'll see that it is nothing but a straw man based on stereotypes and is purposely constructed to mislead people away from what we're actually saying. It's actually incredibly dishonest. But let's jump into it.
Another claim, far more common in the anti-feminist camps, is that the modern education system is sissifying our boys.
Sissifying our boys, and sissifying in talking marks. That's strange. I've never heard of an MRA talking about education sissifying our boys. It's almost like they're trying to construct a straw man here. But, I tell you what, I could be wrong. Maybe there's an MRA out there somewhere who is claiming that our boys are being sissified. Maybe there's lots of MRAs. I've just missed them for some reason. I mean, it would have been handy if they had have given us a citation to who was making this claim. But since they haven't, let's do a little bit of research and see what we find. So I did a Google search for sissifying our boys and men's rights. And the first result I got was the Rationalwiki article. That's interesting. Then I got an article by The Rebel, which is Journalist Blames Feminism After Sissified Men Wear Skirts. So Rebel Media isn't part of the men's rights movement, and we can see here that the search has shown right and men as 2 different things. Then there's Scary Mummy, Raising Feminist Boys. I'm pretty sure that's not a men's rights blog or website. And once again, men and rights are separate. And then we have a couple of hits from a WordPress, which is the New Age Lifestyle. Once again, men and rights are separate. And then we have another page called Killer Physique, 8 Reasons Most Modern Men Are Castrated Pussies. And once again, men and rights, or rights, is separate. Now, I didn't do an extensive search, but I can't seem to find any MRAs saying that boys are being sissified. Okay, what about MRA? So once again, I did a search for sissifying our boys and the term MRA. And the top hit was the Rationalwiki Men's Rights Movement site again. What a coincidence. Then we have a hit from Mancheese, the crazy radical feminist. When she uses the term sissifying, she's referring to a transgender post or something. The third hit is a blogspot which seems to have reposted the Rationalwiki article. And then we have a Tumblr blog which is linking to what seems to be porn. And then we have another site called Bitch Flicks, which uses the term MRA once, but not in relation to being sissified. After that, we have an article on Exo Jane called I Was Raised to Hate Men and Now I Don't Know What to Think. I'm guessing that's not an article written by an MRA. So I can't seem to find where these MRAs are claiming that our boys are being sissified. That's strange. I'm sure it's just an oversight by Rationalwiki that they didn't provide a citation, because I'm sure they wouldn't have just made that up, right? Now, it does read, far more common in the anti-feminist camp. So it is possible what they've done is they've found some anti-feminists somewhere who are claiming that our boys are being sissified and just applied that argument to MRAs, even though it's not an argument made by MRAs. Because, Rationalwiki is all about honesty, right? They wouldn't be putting words in someone's mouth to make a point now, would they? Because remember, all these claims come from actual MRA sites. Sure they do, sure. Next.
Our schools today discourage boys from fighting. Oh noes.
So what they're doing when they're constructing this straw man is taking legitimate points and then twisting them into what they're not. Now, it is true that we say boys should be allowed to be boys and to run and play and be active and to have a more hands-on style of learning. Now, one of the things about boys being boys is they will occasionally get into fights. But that doesn't mean we're encouraging boys getting into fights. That's not the only form of physical activity. That's not the only way boys can be active. And it most definitely isn't a different style of learning in a classroom, is it? So once again, no citations, and they've taken our point and distorted it into something it's not. They're trying to construct a straw man of MRAs wanting little boys to be big, strong, masculine men. We're somehow trying to force little boys into being hyper-masculine he-men or some shit, which of course is exactly what they hate. They hate masculinity, and they particularly hate any type of hyper-masculinity. So when we say boys are falling behind in schools, they automatically assume that we must be talking about the opposite of what they want, which is the destruction of masculinity. You'll see what I mean as we go on. Next.
Such anti-feminist MRAs claim the schools discourage competition and hyper-protect kids from natural, normal, manly roughhousing.
Okay, let's deal with the manly roughhousing first. We're talking about kids here, right? It is true, kids do roughhouse, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that within reason. However, I don't think it's manly. I think it's kids being kids. I mean, when I was in school, we used to play wrestle and throw each other about and all kinds of shit. No one ever got hurt. No one got killed. It didn't turn us into rapists or axe murderers. It was just boys being boys, basically, being more active, playing in more active ways. Once again, I don't think this is being manly. I think it's being a kid, a boy. And it is true, a lot of schools discourage competition and hyper-protect kids. Now, obviously you want to have a safe environment for kids, but, getting a scraped knee isn't the end of the world, right? You could argue that it's actually part of growing up. Getting scrapes and bumps or whatever doesn't kill you. You get over it and you go on. But if you're hyper-protected, then it creates a fear of the world. And although it might be a good thing to discourage competition for really young kids, I think competition is healthy for older kids. I can understand not keeping score if you're playing a sport when they're 5, right? But, when they're 10 or 12 or whatever, then, there's nothing wrong with having a winning side and a losing side. Learning how to lose is an important part of growing up. And competition encourages kids to get better, to aim for goals and to reach those goals. Next.
MRAs have held such actions up as proof that feminist society wants boys to be girls.
Once again, they've taken what we've said and they've distorted it. It's not that a feminist society wants boys to be girls. It's that a feminized society sees boys as broken girls. This shouldn't be a surprise to anyone, because for the last 40 or 50 years, all we've heard is how terrible men are. Men are the violent ones, men are the domineering ones, men are the evil oppressors. Masculinity is toxic. And girls are either pure and innocent and almost holy, or helpless victims. So when you create a society with this dynamic, of course we are going to look at boys as being broken girls. Girls are the standard, and boys, well, they're the ones not reaching that standard, right? We'll be looking more at that in a minute, but for now, next.
Another claim is that the education system is run for the benefit of girls rather than boys because women are overrepresented among university and graduate school students.
Well, yes, this is actually true. Warren Farrell, in the clip I played, actually pointed out a UN study which showed that boys are marked more harshly than girls. And it's not the only study which has shown that.
Do teachers really discriminate against boys? A study on gender disparities in elementary school performance found that boys received lower grades than girls, even when their test scores were equal to or higher than the girls. Worries about the declining academic performance of boys, a topic of increasing alarm this past decade, have intensified recently. It seems that boys are being judged both unduly harshly and leniently at school. A new study on gender disparities in elementary school performance, the first study to examine both objective and subjective performance, found that boys were given lower grades than girls, even in cases such as math and science where their test scores were either equal to or higher than the girls' test scores. It seems like out-and-out discrimination, except there is an interesting wrinkle. Teachers didn't downgrade boys who had identical test scores to girls if they seemed to share the girls' positive attitude toward learning. In fact, the opposite seemed to occur. The well-socialized boys received small grade onus for their good behavior relative to other boys, suggesting that teachers may be overcompensating when they encounter boys whose behavior exceeds expectations. In other words, boys who match girls on both test scores and behavior get better grades than girls do, but boys who don't are graded more harshly. Which means that the issue of what to do with underperforming boys just got a lot more complicated.
So I said a little bit earlier that we are looking at boys as being broken girls, and that this shouldn't be a surprise to anyone because we've had 40 years of feminists telling us that men are the evil, domineering aggressors and women are their innocent victims. So maybe we should have a look at how this message is filtering into schools and the effect that it's having on boys.
We mustn't make boys feel bad about being male. Last Monday was White Ribbon Day at the local public primary school. The children were encouraged to write poems reflecting upon the theme. Some of them were read out during school assembly. "How was White Ribbon Day, boys?" I asked as they ambled towards me, basketballs bouncing, white t-shirts smudged to a grade brown. "It was really anti-boy," came the unexpected response. Boys seemed to almost burst with enthusiasm. Their scabby knees and bruised legs a testament to the way they gulp at life. And they can be tender, instinctive protectors of brothers, sisters and mothers. But this was not the message on White Ribbon Day. According to one of my boys, men are just people who drink too much and discriminate women. I asked about the poetry. Girls said things like, "Stop hurting us." One teacher said, "Girls are just as good as boys, if not better." So negative, so counterproductive. Good intentions executed so poorly. Of course, boys need to be educated not to hit women, and girls need to know it's not okay to be it. But do we really want little boys left feeling bad about being male after White Ribbon Day? Our public schools should not portray domestic violence as a battleground of boys versus girls. Men need to respect women and vice versa. We must stop indoctrinating boys in feminist ideology. Feminist organizations, backed by government policy, are teaching young boys at school to feel guilty and ashamed of their gender, writes Dan Bell. On Wednesday, the Daily Mail reported that a school in Oxford has become the first to introduce "Good Lad" workshops, in which boys are singled out for sessions that teach them about the scale of sexual harassment and violence aimed at female students, and how they must stand up for women's rights. The workshops are the latest in a mushrooming series of initiatives in which ideologically driven activists are being invited into schools, driven by the belief that boys need to be re-educated to prevent them from becoming a threat to women. In November last year, The Times reported on a program in London schools in which 2 American women, one a former sex crime prosecutor, reprogram teenage boys' sexual manners so they are fit for a feminist world. According to the report, they start the class by asserting that misogyny is on the rise, before going on to describe real-life sex crimes that have happened to teenagers in this area with brutal accuracy. The article concludes, approvingly, that by the end of the session, the boys are scarred for life. In context of the chasm between boys' and girls' educational attainment and a rising male suicide rate that is now nearly 4 times that of women's, why are schools deciding that when it comes to talking about gender, what boys need most is an extra dose of guilt and shame? Another organization, A Call to Men UK, also goes into schools, stating on its website, A Call to Men UK believes that preventing violence against women and girls is primarily the responsibility of men. We re-educate through trainings, workshops, presentations, school projects and community initiatives. By all means, Let's teach children about healthy relationships, but that's not really what these campaigns are about. Instead, there is an overwhelming emphasis on imposing an ideological worldview that first and foremost sees young men as potential abusers and perpetrators, while routinely ignoring and minimizing the very real threat of violence, both physical and sexual, that boys and young men face themselves. Imagine what it must be like as a young man who has been beaten or sexually abused, possibly by a woman, to then be forced to attend a workshop that tells him that simply because he's a young man, he should hang his head in shame as a potential abuser? Neither are these activist interventions just the preserve of a few radical head teachers, they in fact reflect official government policy. In March, the government announced the introduction of new consent classes for children aged as young as 11. The plans were launched on International Women's Day, and the PSHE guidelines repeatedly state they are primarily part of the government's A Call to End Violence Against Women and Girls strategy. According to a fact sheet published by one of the guidelines' key contributors, a top priority for the lessons is challenging notions of male sexual entitlement, and the lessons should be seen in the context of a society in which gender inequality is the norm, and girls and young women are subjected to high levels of harassment, abuse and violence, overwhelmingly from men and boys they know. Apparently, in the eyes of the government, schoolboys don't so much see girls as their friends and peers, but as potential prey. What 9-year-old boys dislike about masculinity. In honor of International Men's Day yesterday, Twitter user Mr. Pooney tweeted a photo of a list of things that 9-year-old boys said they don't like about being male. Not being able to be a mother. Not supposed to cry. Not allowed to be a cheerleader. Supposed to do all the work. Supposed to like violence. Supposed to play football. Boys smell bad. Having an automatic bad reputation. Grow hair everywhere. The list comes from a workshop held in 2012 as part of the White Ribbon Campaign, a worldwide movement of men and boys seeking to end violence against women and girls, promote gender equity, healthy relationships and a new vision of masculinity. In this workshop, White Ribbon's community engagement manager Jeff Pereira gathered a group of 54th grade boys and asked them, "What do you like or dislike about being a boy?" The participants complained that boys are not allowed to be a cheerleader, supposed to like violence and play football, and not supposed to cry. But in his reflection on the event, Pereira says he was particularly struck by the first item on the list, not being able to be a mother. He tried to talk to the boy who came up with that response. I said, "But you could be a father? That's what you could do, be a dad." He looked at me with a confused face as if I just spoke in another language. My mind raced as I wondered just how many of these 50 boys had physically present but not emotionally present fathers or role models, or had fathers who were present at all. If they did hang out, they did little more than throw the ball around. We need more maps to manhood. It's time to teach our sons that being a present father is masculine.
It's time to teach our sons that being a present father is masculine. Yes. Now, if only we could teach the family court system to be fair and equal, maybe we could start getting somewhere, right? Now, what I find ironic about these negative messages is just a few years ago, we were being told this.
This is Band Bossy. Take one.
Pushy. Stubborn. Pushy. Stubborn. Bossy. Bossy.
When I was growing up, I was called bossy.
I think the word bossy is just a squasher.
Being labeled something matters. By middle school,
Girls are less interested in leadership than boys.
And that's because they worry about being called
Bossy.
We need to tell them it's okay to be ambitious.
we need to help them lean in
words matter.
Let's just ban the word bossy.
and encourage girls to lead.
To be strong and be ambitious.
Listen to your own voice.
There are no limits. Dare to be you.
You can change the world.
Let's ban bossy.
Be brave. Be you.
Ban bossy.
Join us to ban bossy.
I'm not bossy. I'm the boss.
Encourage girls to lead. Take the pledge at banbossy.com.
I see. So telling young girls that they're bossy is going to harm them, right? It's going to stop them from becoming CEOs or the president or a prime minister or something like that. It's going to crush them. It's going to destroy their spirit and pull down their self-esteem. But at the same time, telling little boys that they're toxic and future rapists and they're violent because that's what males are, all that is perfectly fine.
Being labeled something matters.
Absolutely nothing wrong with that. Yeah, I'm sure that's going to have no effect on the extremely high male suicide rate.
So, for example, before age 9, girls and boys committed suicide equally. Age 10 to 14, twice the amount for boys. 15 to 19, 4 times the amount. Age 20 to 24, 6 times the amount for boys.
Now, there is another issue with teaching boys that what they really are just broken girls. And that's the fact that we're drugging so many of them.
The drugging of the American boy. By the time they reach high school, nearly 20% of all American boys will be diagnosed with ADHD. Millions of those boys will be prescribed a powerful stimulant to normalize them. A great many of those boys will suffer serious side effects from those drugs. The shocking truth is that many of those diagnoses are wrong, and that most of those boys are being drugged for no good reason, simply for being boys. It's time we recognize this as a crisis. If you have a son, you have a 1 in 7 chance that he has been diagnosed with ADHD. If you have a son who has been diagnosed, it's more than likely that he has been prescribed a stimulant. The most famous brand names are Ritalin and Adderall. Newer ones include Vivance and Concerta, to deal with the symptoms of that psychiatric condition. According to manufacturers of ADHD stimulants, they are associated with sudden death in children who have heart problems, whether those heart problems have been previously detected or not. They can bring on a bipolar condition in a child who didn't exhibit any symptoms of such a disorder before taking stimulants. They are associated with new or worse aggressive behavior or hostility. They can cause new psychotic symptoms such as hearing voices and believing things that are not true, or new manic symptoms. They commonly cause noticeable weight loss and trouble sleeping. In some children, some stimulants can cause the paranoid feeling that bugs are crawling on them. Facial tics. They can cause children's eyes to glaze over, their spirits to dampen. One study reported fears of being harmed by other children and thoughts of suicide. 6.4 million children between the ages of 4 and 17 have been diagnosed with ADHD. By high school, nearly 20% of all boys will have been diagnosed with ADHD, a 37% increase since 2003. On this everyone agrees, the numbers are big. The number of children who have been diagnosed with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, overwhelmingly boys, in the United States has climbed at an astonishing rate over a relatively short period of time. The Centers for Disease Control first attempted to tally ADHD cases in 1997 and found that about 3% of American school children had received the diagnosis, a number that seemed roughly in line with past estimates. But after that year, the number of diagnosed cases began to increase by at least 3% every year. Then, between 2003 and 2007, cases increased at a rate of 5.5% each year. In 2013, the CDC released data revealing that 11% of American school children had been diagnosed with ADHD, which amounts to 6.4 million children between the ages of 4 and 17, a 16% increase since 2007 and a 42% increase since 2003. Boys are more than twice as likely to be diagnosed as girls, 15.1% to 6.7%. By high school, even more boys are diagnosed, nearly 1 in 5. Almost 20%. And overall, of the children in this country who are told they suffered from attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, 2/3 are on prescription drugs. And on this, too, everyone agrees, that among those millions of diagnoses, there are false ones. That there are high-energy kids, normal boys, most likely, who had the misfortune of seeing a doctor who had scant, if any, training in psychiatric disorders during his long-ago residency but had heard about all these new cases and determined that a hyper kid whose teacher said he has trouble sitting still in class must have ADHD. That among the 6.4 million are a significant percentage of boys who are swallowing pills every day for a disorder they don't have.
So there has been a dramatic increase in the number of kids being put on drugs to normalize them. This is interesting because when you have almost 20% of a population acting a certain way, how is that not normal? Couldn't that be a conclusion that we come to, that it's just normal behaviour if 1 in 5 of a population are actually doing that? But apparently these kids need to be drugged so they can act normal, which what they mean by that is not act like little boys. So we have a large range of issues here. We have a lack of male role models both in the home and in the school system. We have the demonisation of males and masculinity, which starts at a very early age. In fact, I've seen journalists write articles about kindergarten rape culture before. Yes, apparently even little boys in kindergartens are capable of rape culture. The demonisation starts that early. And then we have a large percentage of boys being drugged because they're not acting normal. And I'm putting normal in talking marks there. Who exactly defines what is normal, I wonder? And these aren't the only topics. We could discuss why there aren't more male teachers in the schooling system, for example. There used to be a large number of male teachers, but now they've dwindled. And I think it's a good question to ask, why exactly has that happened? Possibly it's due to the demonisation of males and masculinity in the wider community, and the notion that children aren't safe around men, which is interesting considering the number of female teachers sleeping with their male students.
Is live at Mango Elementary School tonight, where the accused teacher worked. And Eric, I understand that this teacher was highly regarded.
Well, not just highly regarded, Heather. She won a major award here last year. You know, if you're a parent in the Hillsborough County School District, you're probably saying to yourself, I can't believe that this is happening again. The school district points out it has 14,000 workers. They say try to keep it in perspective, but they had to send out one of those automated phone calls again today to parents from here at Mango Elementary School, and even had a crisis team on hand to handle the reaction. Detectives say it started in December. 29-year-old Ethel Anderson, ironically, Mango Elementary School's Diversity School Teacher of the Year last year, charged with having a sexual relationship with a 12-year-old boy she'd been tutoring.
And may now be traveling together in Kelsey Peterson's white Pontiac. An arrest warrant has been issued for the 6th grade teacher, charging her with kidnapping, child abuse, and contributing to the delinquency of a minor. Police nationwide have been notified about the missing pair. Joining us now is AP reporter Oscar Garcia. Oscar, thanks for taking the time. What do we know about the search?
No problem, Dan. All we know about the search right now is that they haven't found him yet, and really police aren't giving too much more than that. We just know a couple of details. We know that the kid went to the school. We know that Kelsey Peterson herself was a 6th grade math teacher at the school. It's not clear whether he took any classes from her or not, but authorities are saying that the relationship might have started about a year ago.
And they went on the run because they had been discovered, correct?
Well, the teacher was placed on administrative leave on Thursday, and her laptop was confiscated by district officials, and the pair went missing sometime either Friday night or early Saturday morning. So it was about then, and people around there are saying that it was after they were discovered, yeah.
Kelsey Peterson cried and admitted what she did was wrong. The former Lexington teacher learned today she'll spend the next 5 years behind bars. The sentence handed down in U.S. District Court. Peterson received a 6-year sentence but is given credit for 1 year already served. She will not be eligible for parole but could get out after 4 years for good behavior. Peterson pled guilty in July to a federal charge of traveling with intent to have illicit sexual conduct. The former teacher left Nebraska and fled to Mexico last October with a 13-year-old boy. The two had been having a sexual relationship since he was 12.
But even in a lot of those cases, I hear the boys being blamed.
Those choices began when 25-year-old Kelsey Peterson started a sexual relationship with Fernando Rodriguez, a 12-year-old student with a crush.
I remember him specifically asking me one day in the middle of class if I'd marry him.
Kelsey's lawyer says Fernando wanted more.
He tried to kiss her, he would grab her, he would do these things. She didn't initiate this relationship. That young man did.
Fernando began calling Kelsey on her cell phone. After she moved to Lexington, he started showing up at her house.
I remember the first day he kissed me. I was shocked. I can remember thinking, whoa, like, this isn't, no.
How old did you think he was?
It would have been 13. That's just it. It got to the point in my life where, or in our relationship, we didn't see age anymore.
But, you know, he was still, I mean, at least in the eyes of the law, a boy.
Mm-hmm. He wasn't, in my mind, he quit being a teenage boy. He was 5'8", 170 pounds, and he had my name tattooed across his chest. And to me, he was a man.
Yeah, that toxic masculinity is really, really bad stuff. Now, Rationalwiki could have chosen to talk about any of these issues and more, which are being talked about by men's rights activists, and not just men's rights activists, by the way. We're not the only ones talking about these issues. And they could have presented these arguments as our talking points. But instead they chose to go for a straw man. And the question is, why? Now, the obvious answer is the same old answer that we always get, is they're just trying to demonize us, they're trying to make us look bad, they see us as an opposition to their ideology, and they don't want to admit that men have issues. So they do whatever they can to diminish and dismiss those issues, to demonize us and to shut us down. If you've watched this series, you've seen it 1,000 times. But there might be another element here in this particular case, and I mentioned it earlier. As we saw with the demonization of males and masculinity in schools, but not just in schools, masculinity is seen as the problem. Men are seen as the problem. There are people out there with the ideology that masculinity is wrong and toxic. It is the cause of all the problems in the world. So when we say boys are having problems in schools, they automatically hear, well, it must be that MRAs want little boys to be big, strong, manly men who play football and eat raw meat and want to be like Chuck Norris or what the fuck ever they have in their twisted minds. Because they obviously come to the conclusion that we believe in the exact opposite of what they believe. They don't bother actually investigating what we believe. They just make a whole heap of assumptions, and you know, that's good enough, right? Close enough, right? So I find it amazing that their whole straw man, their whole assumption about us is that we want to create little boys, we want to turn little boys into manly men, and we don't want them to be sissies, and, you know, because MRAs don't like fags or something, some bullshit like that. Why this is ironic is because in the clip of Warren Farrell I played earlier, he actually suggested that boys be given the option of going into caring roles, becoming male nurses, for example. Now, I'm not suggesting that male nurses can't be manly or that male nurses are sissified or any bullshit like that, but it doesn't fit the stereotype that Rationalwiki is trying to paint here. It doesn't fit the hyper-masculine stereotype that they want to force on us. Once again, it's because they've done zero investigation, or they are knowingly lying. It's really hard to tell. Although the fact that they have absolutely no citations does suggest that they've just made this shit up. But now that we've had a really good look at their straw man and had a look at the actual issues, let's have a look at their rebuttal to their straw man. Let's see them try to take down their own straw man.
If evidence shows the dangers of football, especially to young children, especially to males, one would think that men would be the ones supposed to gain the most if it was reformed.
And here we have another example of the straw man they're trying to create, because apparently MRAs think the solution to the issue of boys in education is just get them to play football or something, right? Now, I tell you what, let's be really generous to Rationalwiki here and say that their argument is 100% correct. Let's make the assumption that American football is the most dangerous thing in the world to children. Now, obviously, that's not true. I don't believe it. But for the sake of argument, let's say that American football is deadly to children with a 99% fatality rate. And it's terrible, and little children should not be playing football because it's so fucking dangerous, or whatever. Okay, assuming that was true, which it's obviously not, why can't they play other activities? Why can't they just run and play, or play other sports or other games? At what point have we argued that they have to play football? Letting boys being boys and running and playing and being more active and having different, more hands-on style of learning doesn't mean that the only solution to the problem is for them to play football. So it's a very, very specific thing that they've tried to debunk here, as opposed to the wider argument that we're actually making next.
And because of course all young boys need to play football to realize their budding masculinity, and that restricting football on school hours will emasculate red-blooded young boys, leaving them to take up girly things like every other less hazardous sport they could dream of.
Yeah, and once again, the reference to football and being manly and emasculated and all this other bullshit. It has absolutely nothing to do with points that I've made throughout this video. It has absolutely nothing to do with the arguments that MRAs are making. How is this argument about football in any way a rebuttal to the fact that boys are falling behind in education? How exactly is it a rebuttal to the fact that boys are being drugged because they're not acting normal? Once again, normal in talking marks. How is this a rebuttal to the fact that males and masculinity is being demonized in school? Even in fucking kindergartens, for fuck's sake. So it's an incredibly bad rebuttal that doesn't really make any sense, and is just, once again, relying on a stereotype, a straw man that they're created. That MRAs are only interested in producing masculine, manly boys, and we don't want them to turn into girls or some bullshit that makes absolutely no sense. That is, if you actually listen to what we say. Next.
It is true that girls get better grades than boys in all subjects. But there is no evidence that this is feminism's fault.
Now, this is interesting because this last little bit of their rebuttal actually has a citation. Amazing, right? Now, it's a red flag when you see an article which has citations for things that supposedly prove their arguments. Often those citations actually don't, but they think that they prove their arguments. Yet there are no citations for the things that their opposition supposedly says. It's amazing how selective their citations can be. And like I said, it's a massive red flag. If someone's doing that, you can be fairly sure that they've made up certain claims because they're not backing them up with citations. But I did say citations for things they think support their argument, because their citation actually doesn't.
Biological influences have also been proposed as possible factors of relevance, as they could underlie gender differences in activity levels, generally higher in males. Campbell and Eaton, 1999. This factor would potentially make it easier for females than for males to pay attention in class, Kenny Benson et al., 2006. Gender differences in activity level might also relate to temperamental gender differences, Eltz-Quest, Hyde, Goldsmith, and Van Hall, 2006. Specifically, the meta-analysis conducted by Eltz-Quest et al. 2006 suggested a female advantage in effortful control and a male advantage in surgency. Taken together, these gender differences in activity levels and temperament could manifest themselves in the classroom. For example, gender differences in class behavior could affect teachers' subjective perceptions of students, which in turn might affect their grades. Bennett, Gutzman, Rock, and Cerullo, 1993. This subjective component of school marks should not be overlooked, as it has been shown to affect teachers' evaluation of their students, potentially leading to sex-biased treatment. Chalabav, Sarazin, Trowalud, and Jessam, 2009, and Self-Fulfilling Prophecies, Jessam, Robustelli, and Kane, 2009.
Well, isn't that interesting? The one citation they use actually makes the exact same arguments I've been making throughout this video. The exact same MRA arguments that the MRM makes. Isn't that interesting? I guess we can conclude that all the papers that their citation quotes must all be promoting hypermasculinity and that little boys should play football and beat each other up, and they are obviously promoting that the school system is sissifying boys, right? Because that's the conclusion that Rationalwiki came to when we made those arguments. So, you know, unless they're dealing with a double standard, they should apply those same standards to other people who make those arguments, right? Of course not. Of course not. Because their entire argument is based on a straw man. Now, I should point out two things to be 100% fair, and that is their citation also suggests other reasons why boys are falling behind, and that's perfectly fair. In most circumstances, there are a variety of reasons why a particular thing is a particular way, and boys being more active and being punished for that, in a sense, being punished for that, could just be one of many factors. Now, the second point I should make, to be 100% fair, is that Rationalwiki used this particular paper as a citation not to prove that point or to disprove that point, but to make the point that feminism is not to blame for boys falling behind. And I would say it's not entirely feminism. It's a much bigger thing than just feminism. Although, as I've shown in this video, the demonization of males is a very key factor. The fact that boys are being taught to have less self-worth because they're boys is an important factor. The fact that male teachers are less likely to go into teaching because they're afraid of being falsely accused of something or being thought of as a pedophile is a key factor. And that can be traced to the hysteria that comes from anti-male propaganda. So feminism definitely plays a part in this. I'm not willing to say it's all feminism, or even all feminists, but there is definitely some fault. And even if feminists didn't play any part in it whatsoever, these are still issues that need to be talked about. They don't suddenly become issues because feminism is guilty or isn't guilty or whatever. They're issues because they're fucking issues. And they're affecting children. And the fact that Rationalwiki is willing to dismiss them by focusing purely on straw men, in my opinion, is fucking disgusting.
I am a reporter. I'm an investigative reporter. I'll tell you frankly, I'm very surprised to be at a conference about the future of men because I am a former girl and I am a feminist by bias, whatever. My political orientation is much more concerned with actually the future of women and than the future of men. But I am an investigative reporter and someone who really believes that you follow the information and you follow the facts. And so I had a wonderful opportunity to spend about 7 years in classrooms looking at what was happening in schools, all different national demographic trends in schools. And what I found was an extraordinary story for me about what I see as a two-tiered system of education in which, for whatever reason, for a variety of reasons, which I spent 2 years really looking at, boys seem to be struggling with a pervasive, or really all-encompassing underachievement. Now, I'm a little. It's interesting. I'm trying to figure out exactly how how to fit the flow of what my colleagues on the panel here are talking about and what my work has been. And I'm really not about looking forward. I'm really about looking at what is. And when I think about what's really ailing men, I don't think that most men that I've talked to in the course, and most boys that I've talked to in the course of my sort of 2.5 years of doing this kind of work, is they're not really looking for wounds. They're really looking for jobs. And they're really looking for jobs in which they can support a family. And they can only, and the world is changing so rapidly that they can only really get those jobs if they reach a certain level of educational attainment. And for a variety of reasons, they are falling out of the pipeline that carries children from kindergarten to the end of college. You are probably familiar with these numbers, but let me just toss a few at you. I was in classrooms for a long time looking at girls and looking at the perilous passage that girls travel in their adolescent years, pulling strongly from work that influenced me, like Carol Gilligan, for instance, thinking about that crisis of self-esteem. But here's what I found in classrooms. I found girls with their hands up and boys going, ooh, ooh, calling me, and boys sitting in the back of the classroom looking like, looking like a piece of statuary, look with the you can't see me look on their face. In classrooms, boys do this thing where they're like, I'm not looking at you, so you can't see me. And those were invariably men, young men. So here are the numbers that I began to look, I was really triggered by. For example, the preschool number is just extraordinary. 5 times as many boys are expelled from preschool as girls. In kindergarten, boys are left back at twice the rates of girls, same as first grade. They're identified as having learning disabilities at twice the rates of girls. They're 4 times as likely to take ADHD medication. In places where it's studied, where people really look at who's taking the ADHD medication, the best studies I've seen were in a middle-class community outside of Virginia, in Fairfax, Virginia. 20% of white middle-class boys take ADHD medication, 20%. In middle school, they get more C's and D's. They are more likely to be identified as having behavioral issues. They do less homework. They're more likely to experience violence. And when I was looking at all this data, I thought, well, maybe that's just fine. I mean, there's tons of boys. Maybe they just bump along at the bottom of the class. But look at Congress. I mean, there's a lot more men in Congress than women, right? Look at corporate boardrooms. There's a lot more men in corporate boardrooms than women. Maybe it's okay. Maybe they somehow catch up, okay? But when you look at the data, when you look at what we know, it turns out they don't really catch up. Like, I was very interested in your slide about the difference between the highly successful and the not successful, and the way that those groups have diverged. What you really see everywhere you look, in every demographic, is a thin margin of high-performing boys. And those are the ones, the wealthy ones are the ones who get to the corporate boardrooms, and the wealthy ones are the ones who get to Congress. But overall, in the main, you're seeing boys really fall backwards in terms of their academic achievement. And academic achievement is the motor to a job, as we know. It is the ticket to the middle class at this point. You really can't be in the middle class without a solid college education, maybe beyond college. So where are the places that boys fall out? Well, when you look at what's actually happening in the classroom, here's what you see historically. You see that historically girls have done better in reading and writing, and boys have done better in math and science. And there used to be a whole discussion about how girls didn't have the math gene. Well, you know what? Turns out they didn't need the math gene, because girls are whomping boys in math now. And they're whomping boys in biological science. It's only really physics, engineering, computer science where girls still underachieve. Now, I look at those, as a feminist, I look at those and I say, yeah, and it would be nice to get women, more women in engineering. Only 34% of women in engineering and physical science fields, physicists, are female. Well, I'd like to see more women in those roles, okay? But what about the gap in reading and writing? Okay, we have a gap in reading. Reading is the fundamental skill, the master skill for school success. And yet when you look at who's achieving in reading straight through school, boys come into kindergarten speaking fewer words, they read later, and the gap between boys and girls grows every day that they're in school until we stop measuring it in 12th grade. And it's so dramatic, okay? In many states, 45% of boys in 8th grade are reading at a below basic level, which means they can't read directions on the little gadgets they're buying. Okay, 45%. Okay, that's an extraordinary number. It's an extraordinary bulge of poor skills concentrated in a certain group of people who are largely male. Okay, so when we talk about girls in science, like I'm all for that, and I'm all really interested in National Science Foundation and how they're pushing girls and stuff, but what's up with the radio silence about boys in reading? We know that dropout rates are calculated in the States by 8th grade reading scores. Okay, if you're not reading at grade level, if you're more than a grade and a half behind at 8th grade, the state knows that you are unlikely to wear a cap and gown. Okay, 45% of boys are in that category. What are we talking about? Because I find that like a very interesting. I find that a very interesting dynamic, and I wonder why we're so quiet about that. Now let's talk about writing. Writing is becoming more and more of a key skill in terms of success, in school, in terms of success in the workplace. We have to be able to write quickly, express ourselves well. Boys are doing less well in writing than girls are less well, but they're also doing less well in writing than boys of 15 years ago. So with all our school reform and all our changing and dramatic focusing on test scores, etc., we're actually seeing a decline in writing skills for boys. And why aren't we talking about this? What's stopping the dialogue? So I don't really understand what's stopping the dialogue. I think that my guess is that there's a bit of a misplaced sense of political correctness, that we feel like we can't really talk about these things because we don't really want to be perceived as being against girls. And I understand that because it's only in my lifetime that girls have achieved anything like equal footing in terms of education. We just got we just made equal attainment in education. We just got here, okay? So no one wants to be part of that backlash and be perceived as part of the, anti-woman faction. But at the same time, what's happening with boys in education, this double-tiered system, is so dramatic. We now have 59% of undergraduates are female, okay? We have